on a housing project that hundreds of families depended on. Caleb Turner stood near the wall, half in shadow. Mud still clung to his work boots. His jacket smelled faintly of rain and motor oil. He wasn't supposed to be here long, just to answer a few technical questions, but his eyes kept drifting to the clock on the wall. After-school care closed soon, and his daughter was waiting. Then the room shifted. Elena Whitmore, the regional development director, the woman everyone deferred to, raised her hand. The noise died instantly. She didn't look at the lawyers or the officials. She looked straight at Caleb. Her voice cut through the room, calm and sharp. "Are you married?" Silence crashed down. Every head turned. Caleb felt heat rise in his chest. That question had nothing to do with zoning, and everything to do with power. He swallowed, knowing that whatever he said next could decide whether he walked out with a job or walked out with nothing but the fragile life he was trying to protect. Subscribe to Just Dad Things for more powerful single dad stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Caleb Turner's alarm went off at 4:45 every morning, long before the sun even thought about rising over Ridgewood Falls. He shut it off quickly, not because he was disciplined, but because he couldn't afford to wake Lily. Sleep was precious for her. Everything was precious for her. He moved through the small rental duplex quietly, floorboards memorized so he knew which ones creaked. The kitchen light flickered when he turned it on. He made a mental note to fix it later, the same way he'd fixed the leaking sink with a washer salvaged from an old job, and the loose cabinet hinge with a screw that didn't quite match. He packed Lily's lunch carefully, sandwich cut just the way she liked, apple slices sprinkled with lemon so they wouldn't brown, a folded napkin with a crooked smiley face he drew every morning. He double-checked her permission slip for the field trip she'd reminded him about 3 times the night before. Lily came padding into the kitchen in mismatched socks, rubbing her eyes. She was 8, small for her age, with the kind of quiet awareness that made adults forget they were talking to a child. She watched him the way other kids watched cartoons. "Did you sleep?" she asked. "Enough," Caleb said, smiling. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. Their mornings were routines built out of necessity. Breakfast. Backpack. A quick check to make sure her homework was still inside. When he walked her to the car, she held his hand like she always did, not because she needed to, but because he did. Caleb's life ran on margins so thin they scared him. Late rent notices arrived with polite wording and sharp intent. Child care costs rose every year, and after-school care was the only thing keeping him employed. His job provided health insurance, which meant Lily could see a doctor without him calculating which bill he'd skip that month, lose the job, and everything unraveled. At work, he was steady, reliable. The man who fixed problems without needing credit. People assumed he was fine because he didn't complain. They didn't see him calculating hours in his head, or deciding whether to buy new shoes for Lily or keep patching the old ones one more month. What no one knew, what almost no one remembered, was that Caleb hadn't always had Lily full-time. There had been custody hearings years earlier, long rooms with uncomfortable chairs and strangers deciding whether he was enough. He'd lost before he learned how to fight properly. Then he rebuilt his case the only way he knew how, by showing up. Every pickup, every appointment, every promise kept. Slowly, painfully, he earned stability back. That stability was fragile. One disruption, a missed payment, a job loss, a bad report, could reopen doors he'd fought to close. When he dropped Lily off at school, she hugged him tightly, longer than usual. "You're thinking too loud again," she said. He laughed softly. "Am I?" She nodded. "It's okay. Just don't forget to pick me up." "I won't," he said, because some promises were non-negotiable. At work, Caleb kept his head down. He solved problems, stayed late when needed, left early when he could. He never called attention to himself. Being noticed had consequences. That's why the meeting later that day felt wrong before it even started. He stood in that conference room knowing exactly what he stood to lose. If this project shut down, layoffs would follow. If his name ended up attached to the wrong decision, he'd be the first cut. And if that happened, it wouldn't just be his job. It would be their home. Lily School. The fragile sense of safety he'd spent years building one careful brick at a time. This wasn't about pride. It wasn't about ego or reputation. It was about keeping his daughter's world intact. And as Caleb waited, watching the clock tick closer to pickup time, he understood something with painful clarity. If he failed here, he wouldn't just be explaining himself to a boss. He'd be explaining everything to a little girl who trusted him to keep her safe. Elena Whitmore entered the room like someone used to carrying decisions that ruined weekends and made headlines. Her blazer was immaculate despite the weather, dark hair pulled back tight, tablet tucked under her arm like an extension of her hand. Conversations thinned as she moved, people instinctively stepping aside. Authority clung to her, not loud, not theatrical, just heavy and unavoidable. She had earned it the hard way. Elena oversaw redevelopment projects across 4 counties, each one layered with politics, money, and expectations that never slept. In the past year alone, 2 projects had collapsed under lawsuits. One had made the evening news. Another had nearly ended her career. She didn't have the luxury of optimism anymore. Every decision was about risk, containment, and survival. That was why she was here. She took her seat at the head of the table and began scanning documents without looking at anyone. Her questions came fast, clipped, efficient. Zoning compliance, safety reports, liability exposure. Names were just names until they became problems. Then she reached Caleb Turner's file. She looked up for the first time and found him standing near the wall, broad-shouldered, quiet, clearly out of place among tailored suits. Work boots, weathered jacket, hands scarred the way only real work left scars. Another contractor, she thought, another variable. "Mr. Turner," she said, voice neutral. "You signed off on the maintenance logs for the East Wing." "Yes, ma'am," Caleb replied. She didn't acknowledge the title. "Your documentation shows repairs completed ahead of schedule. That's unusual." Caleb nodded once. "We had the crew and the materials. No reason to delay." She studied him, eyes sharp. "Delays exist to protect organizations from mistakes." "With respect," Caleb said evenly, "so does doing the work right." A few people shifted in their seats. Elena tapped her tablet. "You're aware that if anything fails inspection, responsibility rolls downhill, to supervisors first." Caleb met her gaze. "I'm aware." She leaned back slightly, measuring him. "And you're confident nothing will." "Yes." No hesitation. No hedging. That confidence annoyed her. She'd seen too many men wear certainty like armor to hide shortcuts. She'd spent months cleaning up after people who said yes when the correct answer was no. She flipped to another page. "You've been with the project how long?" 3 years. "And before that?" "Private maintenance contracts. Residential and small commercial." She nodded slowly. "So no large-scale redevelopment experience before this." Caleb felt the weight of the implication. "I learned fast." "I'm sure you did," Elena said, the words polite and hollow. "But this project can't afford learning curves." There it was. The quiet threat. The reminder that he was replaceable. She questioned his decisions next. Why certain materials were sourced locally instead of through approved vendors. Why he shut down a section for repairs without executive sign-off. Why overtime hours were logged without prior authorization. Caleb answered each question calmly, factually. He explained cost savings, safety concerns, timing issues caused by weather and supply delays. He never raised his voice, never apologized for protecting people. Elena listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. From her perspective, Caleb represented uncertainty, not malicious, not incompetent, but dangerous in a system that punished unpredictability. Men like him didn't play the politics. They did the work and expected that to be enough. It rarely was. She glanced around the room. Everyone was waiting for her reaction, for the direction she would point the blade. "Mr. Turner," she said finally, "you understand that approval authority rests with my office." "Yes, ma'am." "And that continued involvement on this project depends on compliance." "Yes." She held his gaze a moment longer, then looked away. "Good, because if anything goes wrong, I will not hesitate to make changes." The message landed where it was meant to. Caleb nodded, jaw tight but controlled. He had heard worse in courtrooms. He had survived worse with far more at stake. Elena made a note on her tablet, already moving on to the next item, the next risk, the next fire to put out. She didn't see the way Caleb checked the clock again. She didn't know why time mattered to him in a way spreadsheets never could. As the meeting continued, she found herself glancing back at him more than once, irritated by the steadiness she couldn't crack. He didn't fidget, didn't posture, didn't try to impress. That unsettled her, because people with nothing to hide usually talked more. And people with everything to lose usually didn't. The problem showed itself just after noon, the kind of quiet warning most people missed until it was too late. Caleb was walking the east wing when he heard it, a sound he didn't like. A low, hollow groan underfoot, almost swallowed by the noise of drills and voices. He stopped mid-step, pressed his boot down again, slower this time. The vibration wasn't right. The floor gave back just a little too much. He crouched, ran his hand along the base of a support beam, and felt it immediately. The wood wasn't just damp. It was compromised. "Shut it down," he said, standing. The crew froze. One of the younger workers frowned. "What? Now?" Caleb repeated, louder. "Tools off." "Everyone out of the corridor." Someone pointed toward the far end. "We're behind schedule." Caleb didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He stepped between the workers and the hallway like a physical barrier. "I'm not putting anyone on that floor until it's reinforced." Within minutes, the corridor was cleared. Tape went up. Phones came out. Caleb started taking photos, beam angles, moisture damage, load points. He pulled maintenance records, previous inspections, supplier receipts. He logged time, location, and conditions with the precision of someone who had learned the cost of missing details. The site supervisor hurried over, irritation sharp in his voice. "Do you know what this does to the timeline?" "Yes," Caleb said. "And I also know what happens if that beam fails. What if we brace it temporarily?" Caleb shook his head. "Temporary fixes fail permanently." By the time Elena Whitmore arrived, word had already traveled. A work stoppage, unscheduled. No executive approval. She walked the taped-off corridor with narrowed eyes, heels clicking sharply against concrete. "Who authorized this?" "I did," Caleb said. She turned to him. "On what authority? The kind that keeps people from getting hurt?" Her jaw tightened. "You understand, this exposes us to penalties." Caleb handed her his phone without ceremony. "You'll be exposed to worse if you don't address this." She hesitated, then took it, scrolled through the photos, the notes, the timestamps. Her expression shifted, not to trust, but to focus. "How long have you known?" she asked. 10 minutes, and you shut it down immediately." "Yes." She looked past him at the crew waiting quietly nearby. No one complained. No one argued. They watched Caleb, not her, for the next instruction. "Why didn't anyone report this earlier?" Elena asked. Caleb didn't deflect. "Because it's subtle, and because people are afraid of slowing things down." She studied him again, this time differently. "And you're not?" "I am," he said honestly, "but I'm more afraid of explaining to someone's family why we didn't stop." The corridor stayed closed all afternoon. Engineers were called, reinforcements ordered, paperwork filed. The schedule took a hit. Elena remained on site longer than planned. She watched as Caleb coordinated repairs, assigned tasks, checked in with workers by name. He thanked people, asked about their kids, sent one man home early because he looked exhausted. There was no performance in it. No audience awareness. At one point, she overheard a worker say, "If Caleb says it's not safe, it's not safe." That stuck with her. Later, when she reviewed the incident report, she noticed something else. Caleb had documented potential liability against himself. He hadn't shielded his position. He'd written exactly what he saw, when he saw it, and what he did. It would have been easier to adjust language, safer to blur responsibility. He hadn't. Elena closed the file slowly. She still didn't trust him. Trust took time. But something had cracked. Her assumptions that he was careless, inexperienced, replaceable, no longer fit cleanly. Men who cut corners didn't stop work without permission. Men who hid mistakes didn't document them this thoroughly. As she left the site, rain starting again, she glanced back and saw Caleb kneeling near the repaired beam, checking measurements himself. No one had asked him to. No one was watching. For the first time since the meeting, Elena Whitmore wondered if the biggest risk on this project wasn't Caleb Turner at all. It was almost losing someone like him. The first sign that the ground was shifting under Caleb's feet wasn't a confrontation. It was a quiet email. He saw it when he came back from checking the generator room subject line stamped with urgency, sent to every supervisor on the project, and copied to 3 names he didn't recognize. The words inside were clean and formal, the kind of language meant to sound reasonable, even when it was a weapon. Anonymous complaint filed regarding safety negligence. Then again, slower, it accused him of ignoring known hazards, of pressuring workers to keep going in unsafe conditions, of falsifying maintenance records. It didn't include a name, but it included details, real ones, twisted just enough to feel believable. His stomach went cold, not because he feared the truth, but because he understood the system. Truth wasn't always what mattered first, noise did. By lunch, people were looking at him differently, not everyone. His crew still met his eyes, still waited for instructions like they always had. But a few staff members stopped talking when he walked by. 2 contractors suddenly became very busy when he approached. The rumor moved through the site like smoke, silent, sour, hard to catch. Caleb kept working. That was what he did when life got uncertain: tighten the bolts, check the seams, keep his hands moving so his thoughts didn't run wild. But the complaint didn't stay inside the project. By late afternoon, a local reporter called the site office asking for confirmation of unsafe conditions at the redevelopment. Someone had already fed the story a headline. Someone wanted it out there. Liability, investigation, delay, and delay meant layoffs. Caleb drove to pick Lily up with his jaw clenched so hard his teeth hurt. He was halfway to Ridgewood Elementary when his phone rang again. The school. His heart kicked hard before he even answered. "Mr. Turner?" The voice was careful, practiced, too kind for good news. "This is Ms. Holloway, the after-school coordinator." Caleb gripped the steering wheel. "Is Lily okay?" "She's fine," Ms. Holloway said quickly. "She's right here. She's happy. But I wanted to call you because we just got notice about funding changes. There's a chance our after-school program may be discontinued after next month." Caleb stared at the wet road ahead, windshield wipers squeaking. "Discontinued? We're trying to fight it," she said. "But I wanted you to have time to plan." Plan. The word landed like a joke. Caleb's schedule was built around that program. His job depended on those extra hours. If after-school care disappeared, he'd have to leave work early every day. If he left early every day, he'd lose his job. If he lost his job, he'd lose everything. When he pulled up at the school, Lily hopped into the passenger seat with her backpack bouncing and a small paper crown on her head like it was the most normal day in the world. "Look," she said proudly, "we made them for reading week." Caleb forced a smile. "It's perfect, kiddo." She watched his face for 1 second longer than most children would. "You're doing that thing again," she said softly. "What thing?" "Thinking like you're holding your breath." Caleb swallowed. I'm okay. Lily leaned over and pressed her crown down on his head. Now you have to be brave, she said, like it was a rule. Caleb laughed once, the sound thin. Guess I do. That night, the storm hit. It started with wind so hard it made the trees bend like they were trying to bow out of the way. Then rain came in sheets, stinging sideways, pounding rooftops and gutters, until everything sounded like it was breaking. Caleb was already in bed when his phone rang. Side alarm. He sat up instantly. Checked the time. Lily was asleep in the next room. He moved fast but quiet, pulling on jeans, boots, a jacket still damp from the day before. He stepped into Lily's doorway. She was curled on her side, one hand around the edge of her blanket like she could hold safety in place. Caleb's chest tightened. He hated leaving. But he hated the idea of families in those buildings waking up to water pouring through ceilings even more. He called his sister, Aunt Marie, who lived 10 minutes away. She answered groggy, then sharp the second she heard his voice. I need you, he said. Storm damage. Can you come sit with Lily? I'm already putting on my shoes, she said, no questions asked. By the time Caleb reached the site, the place looked like a battlefield. Floodlights threw harsh white beams across puddled asphalt. Water poured from overflowed gutters like waterfalls. A section of temporary roofing had peeled back, flapping violently, and rain was driving straight into the east wing. Residents stood under awnings and blankets, holding kids close. Someone's baby was crying. Someone else was yelling into a phone. Caleb didn't wait for permission. He grabbed a hard hat, climbed the stairs, and started directing people out of danger zones. He shut off power to one corridor before water could reach exposed wiring. He moved like he'd been built for chaos. Calm voice, clear instructions, no wasted motion. One of the security guards shouted over the wind, "We're not authorized to." "I am," Caleb snapped, then steadied his tone. "We keep people safe first." Paperwork later. He worked for hours, hands numb, clothes soaked through, rain stinging his eyes. He climbed onto a slick maintenance platform to secure tarps. He coordinated with the city emergency line to check drainage backups. He helped an elderly resident down the stairs when her knee gave out, carrying her like she weighed nothing. No cameras. No praise, just work, just work. When the storm finally eased near dawn, Caleb stood under the overhang and looked at the building still standing, still safe. Exhaustion hit him like a wave. He could barely feel his fingers. Then he saw Elena's car pull in. Headlights cut through mist. She stepped out wearing a raincoat over office clothes, hair damp, face tight with pressure. She took in the scene tarps, wet residents, workers shuffling around in emergency mode, and her eyes landed on Caleb. He looked like he'd been dragged through the storm itself. Mud streaked up his pants. His knuckles were raw. His jaw was set, but his shoulders sagged with fatigue. Elena walked up, voice clipped. "What happened?" Caleb explained quickly. Roofing failure, water intrusion, evacuation, shut-off, stabilization. He kept it factual, precise, like he always did. Elena's gaze flicked past him to the families huddled nearby. She watched a mother tuck a blanket around her child. She watched Caleb's crew listen to him like his words were the only thing keeping panic away. Then her phone rang. Caleb saw the name on her screen. Investor contact. Elena answered, voice-controlled, but the wind carried enough for Caleb to hear fragments. Damage, yes. Contained, no. The city is already asking questions. Someone has to be responsible. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she listened. Her posture stiffened, like she was bracing against a shove. She ended the call and looked at Caleb again, not with suspicion this time, but with calculation. "City officials are coming," she said. "They want answers. They want names." Caleb's stomach turned. He understood instantly what this could become. The storm didn't create the complaint. The complaint didn't create the storm. But together, they were a perfect excuse to bury someone. He watched Elena's face as she considered the situation. Pressure from above, public scrutiny from outside, and an anonymous complaint already floating like a knife in the water. Caleb didn't plead. He didn't argue. He just said quietly, "I did what needed to be done." Elena held his gaze. For a moment, it looked like she might say something human. Instead, her phone buzzed again. Another message, another demand. And Caleb felt the truth settle in his bones. He had worked all night to keep people safe, and by morning, someone was going to try to make him pay for it. The suspension came through just after noon the next day. No meeting. No conversation. Just a formal notice forwarded through 3 departments, written in language so clean it felt like it had been scrubbed of humanity. Pending review. Temporary removal from site. Access credentials revoked. Caleb read it on his phone while sitting in his truck outside the duplex. The engine was off. The world felt muted, like someone had turned the volume down on everything except his thoughts. He didn't go inside right away. He stayed there, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at the crack in the windshield he'd been meaning to fix for months. It ran like a fault line, thin but unavoidable. He thought about the storm, the residents, the crying baby, the way no one had been hurt because he hadn't waited for permission. None of that was in the email. Inside, Lily was at the kitchen table coloring. Aunt Marie sat nearby, scrolling on her phone, her face tightening the second she saw Caleb walk in. She followed him into the hallway. "What happened?" "They suspended me," he said quietly. Marie swore under her breath. "For what?" "They're deciding." She shook her head. "You did everything right." Caleb leaned against the wall. "Everything right didn't pay rent." They kept their voices low, but walls were thin, and Lily had always been better at listening than pretending not to. She didn't look up when she spoke. "Are we in trouble?" Caleb's chest tightened. He walked into the kitchen and knelt beside her chair. "Why would you think that?" She kept coloring, careful, precise. "You talk quieter when you're scared." He opened his mouth, closed it again. "Are we going to have to move?" she asked softly. The question wasn't dramatic. It wasn't panicked. It was tired, like it had been asked before. Caleb looked at the refrigerator behind her, at the school drawings taped up with mismatched magnets, at the calendar with Lily's spelling test circled in blue, at the life he'd promised her he'd protect. "I don't know," he said finally. And the honesty hurt more than a lie would have. That night, after Lily went to bed, Caleb sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a calculator that barely worked. He wrote numbers down, crossed them out, wrote them again smaller, like that might help. If he lost the job, unemployment wouldn't cover rent. Night shifts paid less but offered hours, warehouse work, security, anything with immediate income, anything that would keep the lights on. He pictured Lily waking up and not finding him there in the mornings, missing school events, eating dinners alone with Marie while he slept through the day like a stranger in his own house. The thought made his stomach twist. Dignity was a luxury he couldn't afford. But neither was disappearing from his daughter's life. His phone buzzed. A message from a contractor he barely knew. Heard what happened. "Sorry, man, that's rough." Another from the site group chat. Someone had removed his name from the supervisor list. He turned the phone face down. Later, lying in bed, Caleb stared at the ceiling while rain started again, lighter this time, like the storm was lingering just to remind him it could. He thought about the custody hearings years ago. The way it felt to have someone else decide whether he was enough. He'd sworn he'd never be that powerless again. Around midnight, Lily padded into his room in her socks, blanket dragging behind her. She climbed up without asking and curled against his side. "Bad dreams?" he whispered. She nodded, then shook her head. "I couldn't sleep." He wrapped an arm around her automatically. She smelled like soap and crayons. After a moment, she said, "You still did the right thing." Caleb closed his eyes. "How do you know?" "Because people didn't get hurt," she said. "That matters more than rules." He swallowed hard. Sometimes rules decide things anyway. Lily thought about that. Then maybe the rules are wrong. A laugh escaped him, rough and surprised. Maybe. She yawned, eyelids fluttering. If we have to move, will you still pick me up from school? Yes, he said immediately. Always. That was the one thing he could promise without fear. When Lily fell asleep, Caleb stayed awake, listening to her breathing, steady and warm against him. He felt stripped down to the bone, no job, no certainty, no shield left. But somewhere under the weight of it all, something stubborn refused to give way. He had told the truth. He had protected people. He had chosen right when it mattered. And even now, with everything on the line, a quiet, fragile hope stayed with him, thin as a thread, but unbroken, that the truth might still find its way into the light. The review was scheduled for 10 in the morning and open to the public, which told Caleb everything he needed to know before he even walked into the building. This wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about controlling the story. The room was larger than the last one. Rows of folding chairs filled with city officials, project staff, union reps, and a few reporters sitting quietly with notebooks already open. The air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and damp coats. Conversation stopped when Caleb entered. He took a seat near the back. No work boots this time, no badge clipped to his belt. Just a clean jacket and the same calm he'd learned to wear when the ground felt unsteady. Elena Whitmore stood at the front beside a long table stacked with binders. She looked composed, but there was tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. She didn't look at Caleb yet. The meeting began with procedure, legal language. Summaries. The anonymous complaint was read aloud, stripped of drama but heavy with implication. Words like negligence and risk echoed through the room. Then the evidence started. An engineer presented first, explaining the structural fault Caleb had identified days before the storm. Photos appeared on the screen, clear, time-stamped, undeniable. Moisture damage. Load stress. The engineer's voice was steady. If work had continued, he said, failure was likely. Injury was a real possibility. Next came storm footage, security camera clips showing Caleb directing evacuations, shutting off power, securing tarps in driving rain. Residents were visible children bundled in blankets, elderly tenants helped downstairs. A city safety officer spoke next. No injuries were reported, no emergency hospitalizations. The response prevented escalation. Then came the documentation. Caleb's documentation. Emails, logs, photos, time-stamped notes written in plain language. Decisions explained. Risks acknowledged. Responsibility clearly taken. The room grew quiet in a way that felt different than before. Not tense, focused. The anonymous complaint was addressed last. A compliance officer cleared his throat. We attempted to verify the claims. Several statements directly contradict recorded evidence. Additionally, metadata analysis indicates the complaint originated from a device registered to a subcontractor currently under review for unrelated violations. A ripple moved through the room. The complaint didn't just weaken, it collapsed. For the first time, Elena Whitmore turned and looked directly at Caleb. There was no calculation in her expression now, no distance, just something close to recognition. She stepped forward, placing her hands on the table. I owe this room an explanation, she said. Every pen paused. When I first questioned Mr. Turner, I made an assumption, Elena continued. I believed unpredictability came from personal instability. I believed experience could be measured only by titles and resumes. She took a breath. I asked him if he was married because I thought I was identifying risk. The words landed hard. What I failed to see, she said, voice steady but unguarded, was that I was standing in front of a man carrying responsibility, not avoiding it. She gestured toward the screen behind her. This documentation is not the work of someone careless. It is the work of someone who understands consequences deeply. Someone who knows what it means to protect people when it costs him personally. Elena turned fully toward Caleb. Mr. Say. Turner was suspended because it was easier to pause one person than confront a broken process, she said. That was my mistake. A murmur moved through the chairs. I am formally rescinding that suspension effective immediately, Elena said. Mr. Turner will return to his role with full authority restored. Any attempts to use him as a shield for systemic failure will not be tolerated. She looked at the officials seated nearby. If accountability is needed, it will begin at the top. The room felt different after that, lighter. Like something toxic had been named and removed. A reporter raised a hand. Ms. Whitmore, are you saying the project leadership was wrong? Elena didn't hesitate. I'm saying I was. She turned back to Caleb. And I'm saying this publicly so there's no confusion. Caleb stood slowly, not because he was asked to, but because sitting suddenly felt wrong. He didn't smile. He didn't say much. I did my job, he said. That's all. But the room heard everything else anyway. People met his eyes now, not with suspicion, with respect. As the meeting adjourned, conversations started again, but softer. Different. The reporters packed up quickly, stories already shifting shape. Elena approached Caleb as people filtered out. You didn't defend yourself, she said quietly. You let the work speak. Caleb nodded once. It always does. She hesitated, then added, I won't forget this. He believed her. When Caleb stepped outside, the sky had cleared. Sunlight cut through clouds still heavy with rain, warming the wet pavement. He pulled out his phone and saw a message waiting from Aunt Marie. Lily's asking when you're coming home. Caleb smiled for the first time in days. The truth had landed. And this time, it had landed where everyone could see it. The change didn't arrive all at once. It came quietly, the way real stability always did. Caleb returned to work 2 days later. His badge worked again. His name was back on the supervisor board. No announcement was made, no speech given. People simply nodded when they saw him, stepped aside to let him pass, waited for his direction the way they always had. The difference was in how little he doubted whether he belonged there. By the end of the week, Elena asked him to meet in her office. There was no glass wall this time, no assistants hovering outside, just 2 chairs, a table, and the faint hum of the building settling around them. I reviewed your files, she said, sliding a folder across the table, not just from this incident, all of them. Caleb didn't open it yet. He waited. You've been doing the work of a senior operations lead for a while, Elena continued, without the title, without the authority. That ends now. The promotion wasn't framed as a favor. It came with a clear scope, a defined role, and something Caleb hadn't expected to ask for but desperately needed. Predictable hours. No more last-minute schedule changes. No more choosing between being present at work and being present at home. I won't ask you to sacrifice family time to prove commitment, Elena said. You've already proven it. Caleb nodded, emotion pressing hard against his ribs. Thank you. She shook her head slightly. No. Thank you for not becoming what the system expected you to be. Over the next few weeks, Ridgewood Falls slowly exhaled. Repairs finished. Families returned fully to their units. The after-school program survived after the town council reallocated emergency funds, news that arrived on a Thursday afternoon in the form of a breathless phone call from Ms. Holloway and a loud cheer from Lily when Caleb told her. Life didn't become easy. It became steadier. Caleb started picking Lily up at the same time every day. They developed small rituals. Ice cream on Fridays, library visits on Sundays, quiet evenings where nothing needed fixing right away. He slept more, ate better, laughed without catching himself first. Elena kept her distance, but not out of coldness. When she reached out, it was intentional. Questions about long-term planning. Invitations to planning meetings where Caleb's voice mattered. Conversations that treated him as a peer, not a problem to manage. Once, after a long meeting, she walked with him out to the parking lot. I don't mentor people often, she said. But if you're willing, I think you could do more than you realize. Caleb thought of Lily, of stability, of not wanting more at the cost of what he already had. I'm willing, he said carefully, as long as I don't lose what matters. Elena smiled just a little. That's exactly why I asked. The town noticed the shift too. Fewer complaints, fewer emergencies. People trusted the work because they trusted the people doing it. Caleb's crew stood taller, spoke more confidently, took pride in details that used to feel invisible. One afternoon, as Caleb locked up the site, a resident stopped him, an older man with a keen and tired eyes. You're the one who carried Mrs. Jensen during the storm, he said. Caleb nodded, uncomfortable. She was scared. The man extended his hand. You kept us safe. Caleb shook it, feeling something settle inside him. A quiet confirmation that he hadn't imagined the cost being worth it. At home that night, Lily spread her homework across the table and looked up at him with a smile that reached her eyes. You're not holding your breath anymore, she said. Caleb paused, then smiled back. Guess not. Outside, the town was calm. Lights glowed in windows. Rain had finally given way to clear skies. Things weren't perfect. They never would be, but they were solid. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The evening settled in gently, without urgency or alarms. The kitchen light glowed warm over the small table as rain tapped softly against the window, no longer angry, just present. Caleb sat across from Lily, her math book open between them, pencil tucked behind her ear. She worked carefully, tongue pressed to the corner of her mouth, while he watched, ready when she needed help but content to let her figure things out on her own. A mug of cocoa steamed near each of them, the kind with extra marshmallows, because tonight didn't need rules. When Lily finally pushed the book away, satisfied, she wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at him. Not like a child asking for reassurance, like someone checking the ground beneath her feet. Are we okay now? She asked. Caleb didn't answer right away. He thought about the meeting, the storm. The nights he'd stared at the ceiling wondering how close everything was to breaking. He thought about how easy it would have been to cut corners, to stay quiet, to protect himself instead of other people. Yes, he said finally, we are. Because you won? She asked. He smiled and shook his head. Because we did the right thing. Even when it was hard. Lily considered that, then nodded like it made sense. She stood, leaned across the table, and hugged him tight, her arms small but certain. I like this, she said, when it's quiet. So do I, Caleb said, holding her just a second longer. Later, as he tucked her into bed, she was already half asleep. He smoothed her hair back, listened to her breathing even out, and felt something unfamiliar but welcome settle into his chest. Safety. Not the kind that comes from luck or timing, but the kind built slowly, honestly, by choosing what mattered over what was easy. Caleb turned off the light and closed the door softly behind him, knowing tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also knowing they would face them the same way they always had. Together. If this story touched you, subscribe to Just Dead Things for more single dad stories, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.